And welcome to Friday night. It is Carcone Carne, still here in quarantine. I'm James Van Osdell. And I mentioned this earlier this week, but Carcone Carne, this here podcast, very proud to be in a partnership with the Brent Sopel Foundation. Brent Sopel, Stanley Cup winner, all around good dude. Now, Brent Sopel, who's been on the show before, you may know he suffers from dyslexia, has for years, and he didn't realize what it was until later in life. And he started this foundation to help people, especially kids struggling with dyslexia and adults who are dealing with it. He's helping raise awareness. He's helping people live with this. And so Carcone Carne with the Brent Sopel Foundation will be starting a series of interviews done right here on Carcone Carne and on the Brent Sopel Foundation's page with big name celebrities, musicians, actors, athletes, people who've wrestled with their own dyslexia issues through the years. That's going to start up next week. I can't tell you more right now, but I promise you this is going to be amazing and inspiring too. So that really excited to be involved with everyone at the Brent Sopel Foundation. That aside, Carcone Carne is here tonight. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Craft breweries are the indie rock of beer. I love supporting our local city and suburban craft breweries. And tonight I am joined by Cesar Marron, the head brewer, and Shawn Decker. They're both managing partners. Shawn Decker of Sketchbook Brewing. You know them in Evanston. You know them in Skokie. Gentlemen, welcome to Friday night. Nice to see you both.
Good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah. Good evening.
Here's the thing about Shawn's setup. His setup looks much more like a podcast studio than my setup. I feel like you should be hosting. Do you mind hosting?
If it would be true if podcasts actually used modular analog synthesizers, but they generally don't. So, you probably have a better mic setup than I do.
Well, let's just agree that podcasts should use them moving
there
forward.
You go. Right. It would be an improvement, I'm sure.
So Sketchbook Brewing, 4901 Main Street in Skokie, 821 Chicago Avenue in Evanston. Let's talk about the business. You opened 6 years ago?
6 years ago, exactly.
Tell me your origin story.
It was 6 years ago in November.
So take me back. Tell me about opening the business, deciding we're going to plant our flag in this industry. We're going to do our thing. We are going to be Sketchbook Brewing.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Wow.
There was a lot in there, including you reminded me, taking way back, Skokie was one of the places that I visited, the economic development, when I wanted to wanted to start a brewery somewhere, thinking only 1,500 square feet was enough. Just take it out of the garage. I just want to do this. My passion, at least at the time, was sharing what I made with other people. It wasn't for me to drink. It was good enough if I could drink it, but I couldn't drink all of it. And I remember talking to Shawn at the home brew club and said, it's hard to find a small space, because at the time Skokie said, no, we have 30,000 square feet spaces for you, $1 million a year. No. I'm talking about a garage,
Yeah, they thought that was a small space. Yeah.
Right. And then I remember talking with Shawn at our Evanston home brew club back then. It's like, can't we just figure out how to do this in our garage? And then we landed at a place in Evanston, which was actually like we talked a little bit earlier before you started. There may be some radioactivity there at the time from a physicist lab. We had no idea what it was. It looked like a bunker, but it wasn't. And we just said, we'll take it, because that was as close to a dirty garage as we could get.
Aren't those all the best local breweries and distillers? Aren't those places that were just transformed from nothing into something really awesome and cool?
Pretty much.
That's what we as visitors and consumers and customers love about these spaces.
Yeah, that place actually did. We joke about the radiation, but it was a small kind of research cooperative with a bunch of different researchers in there. But the main people who had previously occupied our space were people who were doing levitation of matter using low frequency sound and lasers.
Yeah.
And so they had these gigantic, huge amounts of power in this thing. And it was like, I guess they literally had these lasers things that were levitating particles of matter and things like that. And before then, though, it was a garage. It was a Toyota garage, or a Toyota repair garage. So it kind of was a garage that we moved into in the end. But
I didn't know any of this. So you've got like the Manhattan Project.
It was like the Manhattan Project. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
And for people who are listening after the fact, they couldn't actually see. I think my jaw was hanging down as you were telling that. Once you start saying things like levitating matter,
yeah,
that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, they're still across the hall from us over there doing sonic levitation. Actually, that's kind of the thing they're working on now, using kind of extremely low frequencies. I'm not sure low or high, but
yeah, exactly.
I think it's extremely low to basically levitate very small, quantities of material for material studies. So you can basically get it out of contact with anything but itself. So.
I just made a mental note to book those guys for the next podcast.
Yeah, they would be pretty interesting, to tell you the truth. Yeah, he's a big fan of Sketchbook, believe it or not.
Oh, they were. So,
yeah. We all are. Shawn Decker, managing partner of Sketchbook Brewing. So, all right. So you found that space. You found the space that you were looking for.
Yeah.
And then.
But what's funny, I think, just to kind of follow up with what Cesar started there, was I think both of us were kind of imagining a brew system, because we're both home brewers. We've been brewing in our garage and basement, and we've been brewing in 15-gallon batches. And I think we were both kind of imagining equipment of sort of the size you could probably wrap your hands around, or at least both of us could, and we were imagining, like Cesar says, mostly just kind of sharing this with our community. Mm-hmm. Much more than kind of starting a brewery, with a capital B. And so when we found this space, which was definitely bigger than our garages, this is a 2,000 square foot space, so it's not entirely small. And we kind of invested in enough equipment that it was actually was a real small commercial brewery, which is pretty new for us. So.
And what year was this?
2014.
So this is as the climate, the craft brewing climate is just exploding.
It kind of had exploded. We caught it just before the end of the explosion, I would say.
So, I mean, certainly highly competitive market when you decided to
absolutely
walk in. And so when you walk into a situation like that, there's got to be part of you that says, well, this may not work. This is a very busy industry to jump into. Can we do it? Were there moments of self-doubt?
There were, yeah. I mean, there were people that you actually mentioned earlier that even looked at me and says, like, you guys are all smart. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, we said that to ourselves a few times.
but you did it. This is why I love these stories. This is why I love talking to craft brewers. It's your passion. You found a way to make your passion into your business. That's it. That's the inspiration. That's the proverbial American dream, as I understand it.
But James, there's kind of an interesting thing about the way we did this. I mean, there's a couple of ways to start a brewery. One is to go out and get a bunch of capital together and a bunch of money and a bunch of investors, and and kind of start big and basically have deep enough pockets that you can kind of build your business up and do it that way. The way we started, though, was the opposite. We basically got some family members and some friends to loan us enough money for a small stake, in the company, to kind of bootstrap this thing. And we started pretty small with a lot of community involvement with a members thing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Mm-hmm. But basically, when we first started, we didn't have much capital at all, and we started insanely small. I mean, everyone called us a nano brewery, but I think that was probably actually bigger than the mark. We were so small. I mean, we were tiny when we first started.
All right, so let's talk about the community. Let's talk about, for those of us who live in the digital space, we see Kickstarter, we see Patreon, we see crowdfunding and community supported efforts all the time. This is a brick and mortar manifestation of that.
Right. Because it has to be, right? I mean, we're talking about something that is, in the end, it's still manufacturing. Whether you're doing 30 gallons, 2 barrels, 10 barrels in a 1,000 square feet or 15,000, it still has to follow the same ins and outs of a manufacturing facility. But back to the community part of it, I mean, like Shawn was saying, the beginnings of it was like, if it wasn't, if we had to involve our group of homebrewers that were tight to us, still are, and the community around it, both from a survival, obviously, like, because if we know they're here, they want us here, then we already have a community that will come and buy our beer. And then the Kickstarter came in like that. One of the great things about the Kickstarter, not only worked, it it wasn't without like, a cringe. Like we were like, is this going to work? Are we going to get funding, or is this going to be we didn't get it. Let's not even start this. But we did get it when we did the first round, and we got 250 customers basically, right? 250 people at the time. I remember that number.
That's a lot.
Said,
That's a lot.
Here is money for you to start this. I want it, and I will be there when you open.
Yeah.
So that was a huge boost of confidence to say like, oh, great. Now what? Now we need to make product for these people.
The other thing is with that Kickstarter, I remember we hit our goal. I think it was just slightly more than 24 hours into the Kickstarter. We hit our goal and had to expand it. So, I mean, that was another kind of vote of confidence for us. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So jumping to the present day, you have your core beers, your core offerings. You have seasonal things. You have seasonal things happening right now. You've got a January special release. Of the 4 that are available right now, how many of those were there from the beginning? And if they were there in the beginning, how much has the recipe changed since then?
So we had we did have a few of those, but only 2 actually.
3 really
from the get-go. The Orange Door was not around until I don't know.
That was pretty early.
But it was our 12th recipe. That's the number I know, because here's how we're very naive about all this, right? We're like, we want to kind of create the space for people to come in. It's kind of like back in the 1800s where every village had their bakery, their butcher, and their brewery. So I remember thinking like, why do we need to make an IPA? There's a bunch of good IPAs out there. Well, people would come around and say like, you don't have an IPA? They would go out and leave. So we did one, but it wasn't right away. So that wasn't the beer that we had. I still have a picture of the initial board, or chalkboard. It didn't have Orange Door in it because it wasn't one of the first ones. It wasn't until people asked for it. But it was right around like, I would say
it was a few months in though. It wasn't that far in.
But Snow Yowl, no parking. Orange Door, those 3 are part of our 4 core beers now.
We had one called Frogtown Pale Ale, which we haven't done in quite a while now.
Right.
But that neighborhood in Evanston used to be called Frogtown. That's why that
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And some of these recipes morphed into what we have today, which is like amistoso. Like some of it came from something like Frogtown, a lighter.
In fact, beer. if you see my shirt here, James.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, we were going to name ourselves Frogtown until our search turned up a brewery in Los Angeles that was named Frogtown. That's where this shirt is from. Last time I was in LA and I looked him up. 2 kids from Schaumburg. Would you believe it?
Really?
Get out.
I know, right?
Now, right?
And it's a really nice brewery in the Highland section of Los Angeles. So it's very nice. Yeah.
You mentioned Amistoso. That's your lager. That's
a good Mexican lager. So I mean that was much newer. So we I think we started that about 2.5 years ago. One of the things that when people ask what is it that Sketchbook does that other breweries don't do, and there isn't. I mean, this is not an easy answer because it's there's a lot of great breweries out there. There are IPA breweries. There are hazy and pastry, hazy boys and pastry, or pastry boys and whatever it's out there. We like from the beginning, we like to kind of go through the whole spectrum for ourselves, for our own sake, and make beers classic styles with a twitch, with something special about them. And we still like to run the gamut of presenting our customers with 18, 16 plus different beers out there, from German Schwarz beers to English bitters to things that people can't even pronounce, and we have to educate them, and it becomes harder and harder as we get bigger and bigger, right? Because now every time we produce, we're talking about a 20 barrel, not just a 3-4 barrel beer that can go to the tap room. So we've always had a lot of different things in our portfolio.
Yeah, it's interesting. Back in the days of our Evanston homebrew, there were plenty of home brewers who, their MO was, to make really crazy beers, so it's Christmas time and you make a beer with peppermint and mistletoe in it or something, or it's like, you make a beer that has sausage in it or bacon or, things like that.
I would drink those. I get the
yeah.
joke.
Okay. Well, yeah. But that wasn't so much Cesar's and my kind of take on this. We were both really interested in learning how to brew classic styles, and we would kind of both of us rip through lots of kind of famous traditional styles. And I think that was reflected in a lot in our initial sketchbook offerings, for sure, is you did not see a lot of crazy beers. You saw kind of a lot of fairly straightforward, traditional historic styles. And I would say, I think it's fair to say, says that still kind of,
It is, yeah.
defines us to a great degree about our choices. We'll occasionally do something that's a bit off the beaten path, but we really like our kind of traditional beers.
I still remember, well, we we knew what we could and couldn't do when we started the brewery in Evanston. And one of the things we knew we couldn't do was to serve a glass of beer to anyone, because we were in the alley. We were not given a license to have we didn't have space either. Like, thinking of it now, at the time was like, why can't we do that? But now we know so much more. You're like, yeah, right. It would be just trouble to have four people.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've always, and we still do, we always have our community, our customers, ourselves, our product in mind. And, selling, we could only sell beers in growlers. So the idea of making, say, for example, a 12% barley wine that would cost you $30 a growler, you take it home, you drink half, well, if you could drink half of it, and then that beer in 2 days is not good anymore.
Right.
It was just from the get-go, like, no, why do we do that? I mean, obviously the times have changed, and now we can product, we can, and then on top of that, thinking of products that will actually, as we started packaging, products that would go on the shelf and then be good on the shelf for 2-3 months, like it should be. So we're always thinking about that, as well as,
Yeah.
You mentioned the perceived need to have a strong IPA offering. Where do you think things are going now? Where do you think taste is heading in 2021? Like, where's the beer market going?
I've been actually reading quite a bit about that. The new stuff that's coming out. It's not decisive. It's almost all over the place. Everyone you ask is going to say something a little different. And I feel like a lot of it is towards, like, you're talking to two people here that like, for lack of a better word, classic styles, but like Pilsners and IPAs that are not crazy. So we would probably tend to say those things. People that are into pastry stouts would probably say, like, oh yeah, that's going to continue to fly. Hazy IPAs, but the reality is just it's the drinkers. The drinkers are gonna I always believe that the people that are becoming of age to drink and the people that are getting more disposable income to drink is going to dictate what is going to be the next, whatever, like whether it's the lagers are picking up quite a bit. It was mentioned by the Brewer Association how lagers have taken a lot of craft lagers, not your Budweiser and stuff like that, but craft lagers have been growing a lot, as well as heavily fruited sours, more expensive beers to make, but attracting different people. So attracting people that maybe wouldn't drink beer, that are now coming into the heavy fruited sours. It wouldn't be necessarily what Shawn and I seek all the time, but it's new drinkers. So it's really hard to say where it's headed, but I think IPAs are going to continue, and mainly because there's so much money and research being put into hop production, that sometimes actually turns the gears into how brewers make their beers. I just talked to a guy who works for Hopsteiner yesterday, and he was showing me all these different products that they're coming up with that you can spike your beer. They're all real hop products, and this new hop over here, that's experimental hop there, and that's kind of like kind of the new in the market. Sometimes I believe the hop industry actually has a huge gravitational pull on what beers you're going to see out there, which is going to be IPAs.
Cesar, people listening or watching you talk right now are probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking. You have the coolest gig. It's good to be you.
It's pretty hard work making beer. You have to understand.
Of course. But all right, let's go back to the growth and the history of Sketchbook for a little bit. So we're still kind of at the beginning of your story. You're in Evanston let's jump ahead. When did you realize you were able to expand as you did last year?
So we should kind of jump back to our beginning and kind of do the quick tour through, because the beginning kind of was really important in this particular route. So, You know, when we first started, as Cez was saying, we were not able to serve beer in a glass. We had a business that was on an alley, only the second one ever in Evanston. You can imagine how that created all kinds of problems. And in addition, it was kind of, you know, it was a little speakeasy where we were making beer back there. And, you know, and this is in the former head of the Women's Temperance Union. So, you know, it's kind of like, okay, that was also a challenge. And so when we first started, we basically we couldn't put beer in a glass other than 2-ounce tasters so people could taste it. We had to serve, as Cez was saying, only growlers to go. That's all we could sell. We were basically running this 2 or 3 nights a week, not paying anyone. Cez and I weren't being paid. We were still had our other jobs, and we had 150 members in a thing called a community-supported brewery membership, and that's the key thing because that really drove our growth for quite a long time. And what that was people would buy 6 months or 12 months of growler fills once a month, 1 or 2 a month. They would prepay. At the beginning there, most of them had never even tasted our beer. They had no idea what our beer tasted like. We would run 4 taps in the back of the brewery. We ourselves were back there filling those growlers. And people would kind of stumble down this alley, find the orange door in the back there, go through the loading dock with the flickering fluorescent lights, you know, and turn the corner and boom, they were in the kitchen, you know, and here were the guys making the beer, talking about it, selling it, and it became a space, you know, it became a neighborhood space, a community space. That was really special. And that basically kept expanding and expanding and expanding till at some point when we would be back there, it was a destination. It was no longer for members picking up things. It was people coming back there and nursing their 2-ounce pours to taste what beer they wanted to take home and hanging out for half an hour, you know. And at that point, we needed a tap room, right? So that was kind of when we just very luckily got the tap room space at the front of the building. In getting a tap room, we now needed a lot more beer. And that's the point at which we then expanded. Our first expansion of brewery equipment was at that point. Yeah, and so that was kind of, it was organic, you know, we essentially kind of responded to our community in a lot of ways. And when the community got big enough, that's when we made the first move, essentially, to that tap room. Which then we expanded just along with the move to Skokie. So
I love that. And so you expanded to Skokie, this lovely space on like by Main and Grosse Pointe in Skokie. That was completed last July or August.
We opened the tap room August 31st. We started brewing there. What was it? 2 months before then? I think
June 6th was our first.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to understand all the months blur together. So July, August, September, they're the same month in 2020.
Yeah.
I have no sense of time or calendars anymore.
We feel the same.
So I mean, no secret, last year was a dumpster fire full of challenges.
Yeah.
Opening this space, getting it off the ground during the pandemic, how challenging was that? And after it was done, how hard did you exhale?
Well, it's not completely done yet, for one thing, because we haven't had to completely finish the tap room because we haven't even been allowed to use the tap room, basically, you know, not really. I mean, we've had some people in there, but not really. So, you know, we still have some work that we're waiting on until we actually need to get it done. But
the funny thing about all this is coming to my mind now is that, you know, Shawn was mentioning 2014, we opened with just, you know, 3 tanks of beer to brew beer in. Barely any beer in there for our 150 members. Quickly, you know, within a year and a half or so, we find out like, oh, the space is going to open up. We need a tap room. That makes sense. We open the tap room, and then the tap room's too small from the beginning. You know, from the get-go, we scrammed to find more space, and then
we outgrew that tap room in 2 weeks. Yeah.
It was a 27 person, you know, 23 seats actually.
Yeah.
So then we realized, like, you know, after we find the space here in Skokie, you know, we're going to do this the right way, right? And I've heard this before. We were going to do it the right way. Get the right, you know, the right funding, get people to look for a space for us, get a broker, you know, hire lawyers and all this, and then we're going to build it, open it, and start. But then the pandemic hits.
Yeah.
So
and that process,
we're still then processing it.
Yeah, that process that Cez is talking about, of everything from the initial financial projections to getting the money to finding the space, to building the space, to, you know, getting all of the city approval, was almost 2 years worth of work.
Yeah.
And so we're at a year and a half with all of our money paid down on the equipment, which you have to have custom made for you, and a lease that's been in effect for several months already. And that was March when this thing hit. So we got caught kind of with our pants down, basically, you know, I mean, literally like right at the worst possible time where there was no way to back out. There was no way to change our plans, you know.
I'm stressed out listening to the story.
Yeah, it
just
was
thinking
tough.
about it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, you know, the various government bailout loans really helped us. You know,
Good.
we were able to take advantage of quite a bit of that, and they literally probably saved our business. You know, literally. So,
well, talking about community, I mean, obviously, Evanston to me has a very definable community, and certainly the community that came out and supported Sketchbook from the get-go, that's a community. What's the experience been? And obviously it's a weird experience because of the pandemic. You've got the outdoor dining or outdoor seating pretty much exclusively. What's been your experience as far as creating community at the Skokie location been?
We haven't been able to offer that up completely yet, right? Because of the reasons you said, you know, open, here's the brewery. People were like peeking on the window when the tap room, when my dad and I were building the bar, and you know, knocking and, you know, thumbs up, and then of course we can't open it, and then we are able to open a little bit, and then we have to shut down, and then we're able to open the patio, and then we have to shut down. So we really don't. I don't feel comfortable saying like we know what the community will be yet, but we know the potential. And those times that we opened, when we expanded the patio a little bit and did a little bit of an Oktoberfest, you know, I couldn't call it Oktoberfest really. We had a beer Oktoberfest, and we had a patio, but we couldn't fill it up. But we did in the midst of the pandemic with the proper spacing and all that. And we saw a lot of people from Evanston, not only that day, but other days too. A lot of people, a lot of new faces. And so that just keeps, I mean, it keeps giving me a lot of that hope that, you know, we have a large community here too, more spread out. But Evanston is not that far. And we already heard from many people that it's easier to get here. Not everyone, but like, you know, the Evanston people, it's easier for them to get here than it is in the other spot. So I think we're like super well situated where we got the lakefront, the lakeshore people, like closer to the lake, and then everybody else.
Well, and you're pretty much equidistant from the two yellow line stops. You're probably a 10-minute walk either direction from both the yellow line stops.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so easy. It's so easy to get from, yeah.
So people from the city, if they want to, okay, I'm just going to hop on the red line and then yellow line it over to Sketchbook.
Right.
Or they can drive there if they're designated and they have friends who want to hang out and whatever. Or if they just want, in the current climate, I just want to go grab a 4-pack.
Yeah, it's funny though, James, because, you know, right now, I mean, in Evanston, we have so many regulars. Our bartenders over there know by name so many people over there, you know, from several years worth of doing things. We have music events there. We had all of these things where we just get to know scores of people. And in Skokie, you know, right now, the entire time we've been open, the entire, you know, rule of thumb has been to distance ourselves from all of our customers as much as we possibly can, and to hide ourselves from our customers, and vice versa. And so it's really gone slowly about, you know, kind of getting community. One of the kind of strange things that happened was, you know, Real Sound Studio is across the street there on Main Street. Mark Bruner's studio. I don't know if you know Mark at all, but he's.
I don't know. I know the studio. Yeah.
He's kind of a famous engineer. Went by Mouse was his nickname, and he was one of our biggest fans in that neighborhood, and all of his friends too. And he recently passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And you know, and so we held a couple of events for his friends and you know, et cetera, as they came back to the recording studio. But he was probably one of the biggest sort of people in our neighborhood that we had met at that point. And then he passed away, like in the middle of all this, from non-COVID related things. But so it was kind of a weird kind of thing too. So, you know.
Well, it's kind of a weird and interesting stretch with all this potential. I had Jay Ryan, the Bird Machine, on my show a few months ago, the guy who's done so many very familiar gig posters, concert posters. He's done a lot of the artwork you see actually.
Who's also right down the street on Main Street.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This little stretch. I mean, I feel like
he's kind of famous.
Yeah, he's uncomfortably talented. It's just the stuff he does. So I mean, I guess in the current climate. I mean, when I've gone by there and seen the lights on in the patio and people hanging out safe and socially distanced, I mean, you look at that scenario and you think, oh yeah, when things settle down, that's going to be my place. That's going to be the place. I think it's all foundational right now.
Yeah.
And in the next few months, just keep it moving forward, and then it's just going to be bananas.
We are so excited about the unfolding that is bound to happen here at some point. Maybe this summer, sometime this summer, late summer, early summer, whatever. We are so excited about that. So we're talking already about kind of expanding our patio and the outside seating, because we know that's been so popular. Once again, we're kind of responding to what people are saying that they really want, and we can see, how popular it is already. And starting to do music, all of these things we're really excited about getting going, at that space. We want to just host a lot of community things. That's kind of what we want to do. So
it's a starter beer for Sketchbook. If someone wanted to just try something, if you want to bring in the general public, would it be no parking? Would it be Amistosa? What would be the good
those two
gateway
are,
beer?
Yeah, those two are great gateway beers. Easygoing, not hop on their face, bitter bombs. No parking, definitely got good hop presence to it, but a pale ale in that sense. Amistosa is actually, now that you mentioned, is actually Skokie's favorite, if I may say that, because we sell that here more than we sell others. Orange Door is still the highest selling one, but Amistosa is right there, which is very good for a huge number for a non-IPA beer.
I was going to say Orange Door is a one can experience for a lot of us. I'm stopping at one. I can have a couple no parkings.
You got to try a little harder.
Well, I don't know. I could see having a couple of Orange Doors, so it's one of my favorites for sure. One thing we might mention is a great beer for people to try right now is we have our 150 Saison that's on tap in both breweries, but it's on tap in Skokie, and that was a collaboration which Cesar can kind of talk a bit more about with Lanzatech, which is one of the companies there in the Skokie High Tech Park just south of us.
Yeah.
And so that was a really great community thing for us was to collaborate with those guys it's a fantastic company, that company, and the things they do, they're literally kind of game changing in the energy sector potentially. It's one of the kind of coolest things in the world as far as I'm concerned. But maybe
is that somewhere in between you guys and the Superdog warehouse, somewhere perched in between there?
If you walk down that walking trail to our west, down towards Oakton, it's in that major tech building. It's right there.
Got it.
Just south. It's just south of the
Just
Superdog.
south of us,
I didn't know about it until I started walking back and forth. I was like, what? They have a warehouse right here.
Yeah, it's the technology. What do they call it? The technology.
The Illinois Tech Center.
Illinois Technology Center, or whatever
So
it is there.
Yeah, if you're at the yellow line on
I guess Cyril.
south of here.
Yeah.
Right. Crafted Beaver is right there. So between there and here, they're right in the middle, basically.
Got it.
And they
so the collaboration.
So yeah, the collaboration was, it was, I guess, long story short, we met those guys, some of them before we opened here last year in their, the year before last, 2019, in their one of their holiday parties.
It was actually, we were judging a homebrew contest that they were having. Those guys are all homebrewers.
Skokie invited us to go, and we said, sure, we'll bring some beer. So we bring like 5 cases of beer because we knew there was going to be a lot of people there. And then when we get there, there were a bunch of them were homebrewers, and the mayor of Skokie was there, and they invited us to help him judge and pick the winner.
Awesome.
So we kind of felt, we felt humbled and also like, no, we don't want to, we don't want to get in the middle of this. But they were all super happy that we're there. It turns out that we just looking on the crowd, there were actually several of those people that actually were neighbors in Evanston.
And already members of our brewery.
Already members.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, you guys. And then as soon as we opened here, there were regulars, for as long as we could have people here in the tap room when we were open. So long story short, again, they approached us here and said like, hey, we'd like to do a collaboration with you guys. They were basically, they were just shy of completing a 150, a huge milestone, which was 150 days of continuous fermentation. So that's what's interesting. They are another company in Skokie that does fermentation, although you can't consume it, but they ferment CO2 and other trash gases out there from large companies and produce ethanol out of that fermentation. So it's essentially a culture of bacteria that is able to consume gases instead of throwing it out in the atmosphere and producing fuel out of it.
So when I say like a game changer in the industry, in the energy industry, like literally a disruptor kind of thing,
Right.
These guys are taking, waste products and turning them into jet fuel.
Right.
Yeah, that's heroic. That's really cool.
I mean, it's an insane kind of, process that they're working with.
So they thought
fermentation.
they thought that this was like, just right up their alley because, they what they really wanted to do is throw a huge party to all their people, but they couldn't do that with the pandemic. So instead they came here, brewed the beer with us, came up with the recipe together, brewed the beer, and then took 100 cases and distributed among their employees.
All right, that's the coolest. That's a cool.
And you can come to the tap room and get a growler or a howler of that Cesar for yourself. So
right.
That's awesome. Now, one thing I've enjoyed so far in our brief time together, Shawn and Cesar, listening to Cesar, because he is the head brewer, there's a certain way which head brewers use to describe their beers. There's that passion. Like if I were to describe a beer or anything, it would fall flat. But because you're the dude working on these recipes, because you're the dude brewing it, I enjoy listening to you talk about this stuff. It's almost erotic the way you roll through ingredients and presentation. So yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Cez. Take that shirt off.
It's Friday night. So maybe
Cesar,
tell us about Night Game.
Night Game. Oh, well, that if you have a couple of those cans, then
that'll be a nighty night beer for sure. Yeah, a couple of cans of that. Yeah.
Is that the January beer?
So this year we have first time we're starting with a more stricter calendar because our production is a lot larger than it used to be. It's not a huge production space, but it's a lot larger than it used to be. So yes, so basically we have our 4 year rounds, Orange Door, insufficient clearance, no parking, and Amistosa, and then a Night Game is basically like part of our specialty beers. So we're going to have Night Game January, February, and then we're going to have Hop Thirsty Void, which is a double hazy for the next 2 months. And then, so basically we're going to have Night Game in 2 quarters of the year. Now, for those of you guys listening, we already had a couple people that freaked out when they saw that calendar. It's like, wait a minute, I love Snowy Owl. You're telling me that we're only going to have that once a year? The tap room is going to have those beers most of the time, if not all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we invested on having 26 taps in Evanston, 20 taps in Skokie. But for distribution, where we're putting 60 barrels in a tank, we needed to ensure that those beers are always fresh and they hit the market when the market is ready for it. Mm-hmm. That we're going to do that, So Night Game is now until basically the beginning of March, and then Hop Thirsty Void hits April, May.
And Snowy Owl you said that was one of the beers you launched with, right?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. That was one of the first ones.
It was actually an old homebrew recipe of mine. So I'm a bird watcher also. So anything that's named for a bird, generally speaking, is probably had its source in my basement at some point. So
that's amazing.
But
all
particularly Snowy Owl. No parking was kind of a vestige of one of those, but Snowy Owl would definitely be the one that's probably retained, like at least reasonably close to my original recipe. A lot of them have definitely changed over the time, but
so
one thing though, we should go back to Night Game really quickly though, because there is one little bit of the story about that name, which despite Cesar's taking a shirt off over there, which it doesn't really have anything to do with that, which is that we made this beer, which was an 8.8%, ABV beer, a strong beer, and because of the hopping was pretty strong on it too, we ended up with 88 IBUs worth of hops. And obviously, once we saw that those numbers were close, so the recipe got tweaked in order to do that. We had no idea, though, until I think it was Amy, who is Cesar's partner's father or uncle or somebody says to us, well, that August 8th, 1988 was the first Night Game at Wrigley Field.
That's crazy that all
And
came
so,
together.
and so we named it Night Game, basically based on that. So that was kind of what Night Game comes from, was the
Right.
first night game at Wrigley Field.
Kind of speak to our no matter what, it may not be, moving sacks of grain or brewing 5 gallons of beer at a time to fill a barrel. But the community is still very involved. I mean, it's still in the
Yeah.
naming of the beers, and that's a great example. I mean, I
Yeah.
basically I'm from Brazil originally. Baseball was not something I even grew up with, so I had no idea about this. So in creating the beer, that wasn't the beginning of it. We created an easy drinking double IPA that wasn't too sweet. In fact, it's actually lighter. It feels lighter to your mouthfeel than Orange Door does, which is kind of dangerous. That may be dangerous, I should say. So when it was just kind of like a little bit like, well, yeah, let's make those numbers look really cool, like 8.8%, 88 IBU.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we had no idea why we were doing it at the time.
Yeah, and then I bring some of that. I mean, I don't think we even had the beer yet. It was in the tanks. I bring that up in my wife's family Christmas party, whenever that was, 17, maybe 16, 17.
Probably
And
17, yeah.
and her dad, my father-in-law just says like, actually, no, it wasn't him. It was her uncle Dave, who loves
It was
night game.
Dave, okay.
He said, your father-in-law just said you should name this night game. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you don't know why? And I'm like, no.
I'm from Brazil. No, I don't know,
dude.
Isn't that funny? But I think it kind of says something about us still, which is that, we don't do market research on names. We don't go out and kind of, have panels and things like that review them. Our names are mostly kind of crowdsourced, and they come from our community and things like that. So, yeah.
Well, I think you guys are awesome. And I think it really, pandemic be damned, it is onward and upward for Sketchbook.
Absolutely.
821 Chicago Avenue in Evanston, 4901 Main Street in Skokie. Guys, thank you so much for spending Friday night with us.
Absolutely.
We love what you're doing.
We look forward to seeing you in the tap room. So
Hell
sitting down
yes.
with a beer. Yeah.